Orson Swindle grew up in Georgia. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps Reserves in 1957, eventually flying F-8 Crusaders. He was shot down over North Vietnam and spent 2,305 days in captivity. He's also served in a civilian life as a commissioner for the Federal Trade Commission. I will let him tell you his story.
Thank you very much, Kim. Kim and I met at Cooper's Troopers about 14 years ago. It's been a while and we seem to have aged a lot, but I appreciate all of you who've been responsible for this. Are obviously a very prestigious group of people, a very generous group of people, and people who are very serious about what we need to do with our generation. And there are probably one or two generations in here. We're not too far apart. I've condensed my life story into half a sheet of paper here. And I'm sure somebody is in position to throw a piece of cake at me if I go too far. But I want to tell a little story and perhaps relate it to what you're doing here today. I just finished reading Brett Baier, who's with Fox News. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. He's written a book about President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. It's absolutely fascinating. I finished it in about 4 days, and if you know the state of my mind, that's an amazing accomplishment because at 88, I really slowed down a lot. But Teddy Roosevelt was a remarkable man. And I'm so reminded of what he had to say about what our obligations are as Americans for the next generation. And I think you would enjoy reading his book, and I encourage you all to get that and read it. I read it in about 5 days, I think. It's an easy read, remarkable man, remarkable American. And he didn't march to any drummer other than his own, and that I love him for. But I want to talk a little bit about my experiences and perhaps relate it to what we're doing here tonight or what you've been doing for quite some time. I guess we all watched the election returns here last week. As a prisoner of war sitting there for 2,305 days or whatever it was, I did a lot of thinking, as we all did, about where in the hell are we going as a country? Because Vietnam was turmoil, to say the least, and it was, I happen to believe we had a mission there, but we just screwed it up royally. But I got to thinking about what would happen if we all forget the sacrifices that have been made to give us a country of this nature. And President Reagan, who I happen to have the privilege of serving with or for, he had an expression, I can't quote it verbatim, getting to the point where I can't remember anything. By the way, I appreciate the poetry that was read. I couldn't help but think about our efforts in prison to compare notes about what we remembered, and we were tapping through walls to do it. And if you've never tried to tap through the words of the cremation of Sam McGee through a thick wall, you've got a challenge coming. But I can remember a little bit of that. But nevertheless, we worried about where our country was going because we didn't know anything. Everything we heard was negative. But, you know, we were smart enough, and we were a smart group, to realize that something is terribly wrong. Well, I watched the elections, and I feared greatly while in prison that somebody was going to use our own system to defeat us. And it will take a long time to do that. But if you're dedicated to that destruction, and you got the patience and the resources, you can do a lot of damage. And I watched the election returns up in New York City, and I don't know a darn thing about New York City except I've been there 4 or 5 times, and every time I was there, I couldn't get out of town fast enough. I'm from Camilla, Georgia, and you know it's not very big. But I watched the returns and watching who they elected the mayor. And it disturbed me that we've come to that. And I kept asking myself, how did we come to that? And lo and behold, I get the copy of Brett Baier's book and I start reading, and I said, what would Teddy Roosevelt think? He'd probably go nuts and beat somebody over the head. But we are at a very critical point in time, and if we don't educate young people, and remember the Mandami, that's his name, he got something like 70% of the vote of young people, 40 and younger. That's 22. That's staggering. That's just absolutely beyond my capacity to believe. And that means we've got to do things to save this country, and organizations such as this, I think, talking to young people and trying to get across to them to understand, as Reagan said, this enormously beautiful legacy that we have inherited is not passed down through our genes. It's passed down generation by generation, taking responsibility and making sure we continue it. And I salute you for what you're doing here today. And this was just a side thought of me to stand up here and talk about what a great guy I am. I was, I am from Georgia, and my hometown had all of 3,500 people in it. When we had a football game out of town, the whole town was vacant because everybody would go to see us play. We had a pretty good team in those days. But I was raised by my grandmother, my great aunt. My family had been separated during World War II, and my father was a Marine on Iwo Jima and was with the 28th Marines that assaulted Mount Suribachi and raised the flag. My father was probably hiding in a tunnel down at the bottom of the hill. That's where I would have been. But, I've got a little bit of background in this, and as a kid, I was born in 37. That makes me 88, if anybody's wondering about it. I was old enough at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, we followed the war in the little town of Camilla, Georgia. We knew about who was doing what as well as we could understand. We collected scrap iron. We collected old newspapers, and we turned them in for the war. It was just amazing. And I remember every bit of that. It's vivid in my mind. And I wonder how many young people have any sense of that. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was a joyous pleasure to do it. But how many young people would be inspired today to do something like that? Your mission is absolutely spot on. Teddy Roosevelt will be very pleased with what you're doing. And I personally thank you very much for what you've accomplished. I look around this room and I've yet to absorb everything here, and I want to come back and spend a day just looking around, but I see the pictures of several of my old friends who I was prisoner of war with and in the Marine Corps with. My experience in North Vietnam had a lot to do with leadership. We had extraordinary leadership. We had the likes of Jim Stockdale and Jerry Denton and Robbie Reisner, just remarkable men. And we had young officers who were remarkable also because they never gave up. They were innovative. We were totally restricted from talking to each other. We tapped through walls and whispered under doors. And every means of communication we could come up with, we were spot on trying to do it the right way and keep ourselves together. And we had the likes of Jim Stockdale, who said in his memoirs later, he said, I realized we had to establish a community because we will be there a long time. And we had to establish norms that went beyond the code of conduct. We had to establish norms that said, I will not fail my fellow POW. And that's what we did. He was remarkable. When we came home, I could tell you stories about torture and all that stuff, but you probably read most of that. And if you want to know anything about it, I'd be happy to tell you. I can sum it up all up in just a couple of words. It hurt like hell. And it was almost impossible to hold up against it. So you were always scrambling with the guilt feeling that you yielded, which you really had no control over. And could I survive if I keep on going? And have I betrayed my country because I broke? Have I betrayed, perhaps most important, my fellow POWs? When I got my first cellmates in Hanoi after about 6 months, there were 3 captains, Air Force, had been captured about a year longer than me. And I went in there and I had not seen another American. And they dumped me in this cell, and these 3 guys were in bunk beds. They were in leg irons, and they put me in leg irons. And I had known these guys by reputation. They were enormous communicators, and they were tough resistors. Ron Stores and Wes Sharman and George McKnight. And I told him, I said, I want to apologize to you right now. I've not been as tough as you have been. And I feel guilty. I feel like I betrayed you. And they laughed out loud and said, Orson, you're looking at the Ernest Hemingway of North Vietnam. I've written more of that crap. He said, when they've got you, they've got you. And ain't much you can do about it. You just struggle to get through this ordeal and set a new course and keep on resisting. And that's what we did. But the torture stories you've all heard. But I want to talk a little bit about, and I think this is something we need to get across to young people. That is, what do you do with your life? We were there for 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and almost 9 years in the case of a couple of people. I left home, my young son was just 4 years old. When I got home, he was 11. So start to put those kind of things in perspective and think about, what in the name of God have we just done? How are we going to overcome this thing? But I want to tell you the message you can deliver to young people after they see this. This is just great, Drew, tremendous job. But we came home. Everybody was fascinated by us and our struggle and the survival we had over the brutality of North Vietnam. And it was indeed brutal. It was absolutely without mercy. And we all broke at one point or another. A couple may have died trying to avoid breaking. And that's not what we were trying to do. We were trying to survive and do it with honor. And Jim Stockdale and people like he and Jerry Denton and Robbie Reisner set those goals for us. Stay with it as long as you can, but don't die for it. Lie like hell. And boy, I had some great stories I told. And we're all taught, tell them the lies that you can remember. And I said, well, I got a couple of those. And you see if you can get by. But everybody's fascinated by those stories. But I want to tell you another story. And this is a story for young people. And I watch young people with all the despair and the frustration. They can't get this, they can't get that, they can't buy a house. You know, that's been the age-old story forever. Most people do struggle to do most things, and that's why they're so important. But here's a story you probably haven't heard. When we came home to broken families. We came home to wives who had remarried because they didn't know the husband was still alive. We came home to families and wives in particular, that had spent all the money. We came home to parents dead. We came home to children in a few cases that had died. The whole damn world was upside down for us. And just like we did in prison, we paused, we took solace in each other's miseries, and we talked to each other. And as the end of our recuperative leave was about to occur, that is the time it took us to sort of get over it, we started talking to each other about what we're going to do. And here's what we did. Some of us stayed in the military and rose to high rank. We had quite a few flag rank officers that stayed in about 30 years. I got out at 20 as a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. Some of us went to work for Ronald Reagan. I worked for Reagan for 8 years. Some of us went to med school and became doctors. We became lawyers. We became authors. We became fathers and grandfathers. We did everything. And people were telling us, you know, you've been through a lot. Why don't you just sit back and take it easy? We hadn't done that in 7 years or 6 years or 9 years. Our job was to press on. Our job was to advance the ball, to get to the end of the road, wherever that led us to. But we weren't going to quit. And for people to say you ought to just rest, no, you don't. You keep going. And that's why I'd suggest you read about Teddy Roosevelt. He didn't know the meaning of stop. And we didn't know the meaning of just sitting down. We went on to pursue careers of all sorts. It's just amazing. We even had ministers among us. And that really impressed me because we were a rough and tumble bunch of guys. but we stayed in touch with one another. We've had reunions endlessly over the past 50 years. We've been home since 73. Well, this is, how many years is that? 53 years? Something like that. It's just absolutely remarkable what we accomplished. And when we hear young people, they can't get a job because they had the wrong major, well, duh, we knew that before you ever started, but our system was promoting that crap. You know, you can't get a job that pays you enough. Really? Most of us didn't get to buy a house till we were 30 or 40 years old. In the Marine Corps, you don't make a lot of money. I think in the Air Force, they pay them a lot more than they do us in the Marine Corps. But you know, we just didn't know what it meant to quit. I'm up here, I'm wobbling, I haven't hold on this thing. I've got bad neuropathy in my legs, and that's just one of the excuses, one of the things that goes wrong when you pass 40. And I'm 88 now, so I'm well into it. Where's Dr. Boone when I need him? But, you know, we are great people, but we are as great as the leaders we pick and choose. They help make us great. They exploit the potential we have. They set the goals. Like Teddy Roosevelt, he just didn't know any limits. He just pressed on. And we did things, and I must confess, I have never been a big Donald Trump fan because he just tries my patience. This two steps forward, one step backward thing is getting old by now, but God bless him, he has done remarkable things, and he is sort of like Teddy Roosevelt. He's very smart, he's energetic, he's ambitious, he wants to do things, he loves this country, and that's what we've got to instill with better manners in our young people we have today. We simply have to find a way to inspire those youngsters to do these kinds of things. They say your future's wonderful if you just get out there and work for it. And we have a big job to do. And I salute what's going on here because I think you're on the right track. And it's interesting that I would read that book this past week and I come down here and hear almost the same message of Teddy Roosevelt. So congratulations, Drew. We're going to run you for president next year. So stand by. I want to make a couple more remarks, and then I'd like to spend a little bit of time answering questions because I found out a long time ago that you'll have questions that I never cover, and I don't have enough time to cover a whole lifetime, so I don't even attempt it. But let us know, as you learn, what can we do to make a difference? This is a great example here, but there are 1,000 more needed examples. We got to do this better. We've got to resuscitate the enthusiasm of our young people. We can't have 70% of the people that voted for, what's his name, who were in the age of 20 to 40, 70% of them voted for a socialist. If that's not a bell that rings loudly, we better wake up because we got problems and we're going to have to deal with them. And let's deal with them the right way instead of the wrong way. And I'm sure we've been through these kind of dilemmas in our past, and we've survived them, and we've been great. We've done great things. But we're in a different game now. We are indeed in a war. We don't even know we're in, for the most part. People just don't pay attention. And we've got 3 triplet granddaughters who'll be 16 next week. They're beautiful, they're smart, and I'm not sure they know all this stuff, but Papa's going to try to tell them. I want to answer questions that you might have. I'll be happy to elaborate on torture. I can teach you some things that you probably never thought of that were very painful. And if you want to do a few questions, I can do that.
Of course, we're going to let you be here. I'm going to take this.
Okay. We have 2 mics. This is way over my head.
I get the first question.
Okay, you have the first question.
I remember when I interviewed you, you told me a story about your football team and that you had, torture was pretty bad, but you devised a way to alleviate some of that. And then when you were back home with your football team, tell us that story.
When I was first captured, the first thing they did with me, they put my arms behind my back, raised my hands up the back of my head, put tourniquets on my limbs, wrapped ropes around me to keep me bound up, and then put ropes on my thumbs and put those over the rafter in this little bamboo hut and lifted me up off the ground, and they beat the living hell out of me. And I was running out of ideas in a hurry, trying to figure out what in the heck I can do. And I finally told them I'd talk, and they said, "We will test you. Who is in your squadron?" And here I am like this. And I said, "Well, I named off my high school football team." And they say, "Who is the commanding officer?" Obviously, the head coach. Who is the executive officer? Obviously, the assistant coach. And they wrote all this stuff down. And 7 years later, I'm back in Camilla, Georgia. I've survived this. And they in Camilla. I mean, everyone in town came, well, all in the auditorium. And I'm talking, giving a presentation. I looked down in the front room, about 7 or 8 of those guys on that football team. I said, "You better never go to North Vietnam because they're looking for you." But we had to come up with these things. Some of the greatest acts of, absolute criminality come from POWs because we learned how to be a criminal. And we cheated. We cheated all the time, and we lied to the top of the heavens. And they wrote everything down. I was listening. I was taken in. This is after Ho Chi Minh died, which was a wonderful day, 19 September of '69, I think, if I remember correctly. And this interrogator, he was an English lesson. They did that all the time. And he was just trying out his language. And he started bragging about the culture, the history, the culture of the Vietnamese people. 4,000 years of this, that, and the other. And I'm sitting there listening to that stuff, and I'm in a little stool below him. They like to keep you subordinate to them and their eyes. And I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "We have a culture too. It's a great culture." And he said, "What do you mean? You're only 300 years old or 200 years old." I said, "Well, we have a great culture. We have many things we do. We celebrate." He said, "What do you do?" And this is in October. The Marine Corps birthday is the 10th of November, which was yesterday. And happy birthday and glory to the Corps. Today, incidentally, is the anniversary of my getting shot down over North Vietnam. So that's a little bit of interest. But anyway, I start telling me, he said, "Well, what kind of culture things do you have?" And during the Marine Corps birthday, we serve a big cake. And while we were in prison, they would occasionally, maybe once or twice a year, give us a piece of bread that it looked like it had been boiled in pig fat, and they sprinkled a bit of sugar on it. And we thought that was like manna from heaven. I weighed about 120 pounds. So we were in bad shape, and that was really a delight. And we called those things sticky buns. And he said, "Well, what do you do?" I said, "Well, we have beer, and we have an oompa band, and I describe Oktoberfest and, lederhosen and the kids dancing around the maypole." I made up the biggest lies you've ever heard. Well, he finally checks his notes. He said, "November the 10th? Yeah, that's when the National Donut Day is." He said, "National Donut Day." And then finally he said, "What's a donut?" I said, "Well, you don't have anything, but those pieces of bread you give us about twice a year? It's sort of like that." And so he writes all this down, and he'll send me back to my cell, and I get on the wall and tap through the wall. And I tell my friends, I said, "Boy, if you could ask about what National Donut Day is, here's the story." And back me up because they'll have me on the rack. And lo and behold, on November the 10th, we're in a Camp Sante, which I made a raid on sometime later, about 3 buildings. And over in the far corner of the camp, the walled-in grounds, I heard whistling. The Marine Corps hymn being whistled. I said, "Well, that's neat." And here, as they got around to us, they knocked on the door and unlocked the door and opened it up and handed us a basket full of sticky buns. So I'm given credit for getting the North Vietnamese to celebrate the Marine Corps birthday, and nobody else can say that. But let me answer a few questions. Does anyone have a question or two? I'll be happy to entertain you all night
Questions?
long. No questions? Oh, way back in the back.
Oh,
I can't see that far.
It's Paula, sir. I wanted to ask you about your faith and how that helped you get through.
Faith was a big issue. It's not to say that we didn't have doubters, because when you go through all that, doubts do arise. But we were primarily, 99% Christian. We had a few, I think we had 6 Jewish POWs. And to my knowledge, one confessed atheist. And how anybody could be an atheist in that circumstance, I do not know, because you got to go with something. But our faith was very strong. We had all grown up, like I grew up in a sense in a small rural town. I was a Methodist. The Baptists had all the money, and the Presbyterians were always asking for money, and the Methodists just went to church. And we grew up, and interestingly, we had church services. It was spread around from camp to camp as they moved us around, thinking they were upsetting our communications, and in fact, they were allowing us to expand who we were communicating with and learning who was there. We were hell-bent and determined we were going to count for everybody that came in, and we did that. But part of that routine, established by our senior officers, said we will celebrate church on Sunday afternoon, and we didn't have calendars, we didn't have pencils, it was all in here. And we'd see little things that would help us update the data bank that, it's Saturday. We thought it was Friday. But we had an enormous amount of information that we gathered and kept in our heads, and church was a big thing. On Sunday, after the guards had left, after they picked up the dishes from our bowl of rice, we would all go silent as far as communication, and that was tapping on walls and whispering under doors, but we would go silent with that. We would use 30 minutes to think about who we are, what we believed, and we had a church service. And we would say the 23rd Psalm, changing it slightly, say, yea, though we who walk through the valley of the shadow of death. We said the Lord's Prayer. We faced home. That joke makes me choke up. And we just sat there in these prison cells by ourselves and thought about home. And we did it every Sunday. No matter where we were, we would go from camp to camp, and we took that routine with us, and we did it there too, because we knew others were doing it elsewhere. Our faith was extremely important. I had a friend who was a Mormon, and he tapped through the wall the whole doctrine of the Mormon church. And then he told me, he said, that's the good news. You've heard it all from me. I'm a true Mormon. He said, the bad news is if you don't convert, you'll never get to heaven. But our religion was strong. We all believed in a God that's kind, and we all believed that we were supposed to do the best we could. And God willing, literally, we would get home. But that was the religion. Anything else?
Thank you. Orson Swindle, what is the thought you'd like to leave with everyone as we're preparing to close the program?
Pardon that? Say that.
What's the thought you'd like to leave with everyone as we're preparing to close the program?
Well, I'm just, this is not a sudden thing, but I tell you, I've really become discouraged by what we're seeing with, 70% of young people who are out of college, who are white, who are mostly female, vote for something that's so counter to our culture. That's mind-boggling. I mean, I've done a lot of studying of propaganda. One of my favorite movies is Reds. How many of you have seen Reds? If you haven't seen it, see it. There was a guy, what was his name now? I can't remember. But there was an American who was really a liberal journalist and fell for all that crap. And it's about him and the doctrine of communism taking over. And propaganda works. If you pound everybody, and we had it going all the time, a little mic PA system inside of our cells, it would go all the time. We got nothing but negative. Imagine 6 or 7 years of hearing nothing but negative, except when we're talking to one another, and then we did a typical American thing. We insulted each other and argued and things, but it is a destructive, effective force. And we seem to have people in this country that believe that stuff. which for me is hard to imagine how they could be believing that stuff. So we've just got to change this, and it means talking to young people. Talking to old people not going to do you much good, and talking to really smart really smart women who think socialism is a good step forward. Come on, give me a break. Are they stupid? They seem to be. So we got a big job ahead of us. It's not over. We can't sit on our laurels and say, hey, we did our part. Like we couldn't do that when we came home. We said, we can't just sit here and kick our heels back and sit there and say, well, we did our part. We don't have to do anything else. That's nonsense. You work every day at keeping this country on the right path, and we got a long way to go to get back to the right path. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Orson, I know you were roommates with John McCain. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Maybe a story that you can relate to the group?
He was a really sorry Scotsman, and he cursed too much. And John was one of my dearest friends. He was a tough guy. He was almost dead when they dragged him out of that pond, and But they tried to, make him go along with what they said because they knew who it was, because the news Admiral McCain's son was captured yesterday. It's hard to keep a secret. And he resisted, and they pounded him fare thee well. He suffered a lot. Once I got to know John, we came home in 73, about 70, I think. Some of us were tagged as being troublemakers and disturbing the order of the communist regime. And they isolated us, and John McCain was one of those, and Bud Day, whose picture's right over there, and Leo Thorsness, and Jim Stockdale. Well, he was in a very special place for people like him. They really tried to bury him. But John, we argued all the time. We slept side by side for 2 years. And on this concrete slab with about 30 other guys on concrete slabs. And they were basically sort of laying off of us at that point because, the word gotten out that they were torturing us, and that caused them to back away. Ho Chi Minh died. That caused them to back away a little bit. So, survivability was enhanced greatly. But John and I would argue about things until we fell asleep. And interesting enough, as they're about to release us, they're setting it up, they're moving us around, by date of shoot down. First in, first out, sick and wounded go before anybody. And I was, November of 66. And they came into our cell one night there in early January, I think, of 73. And they called off 4 or 5 people, and we knew everybody quite well. We knew the history of everybody because we talked a million times. And we knew they just picked a bunch of guys who were shot down within a week of each other. That means they're starting to segregate us by shoot down, so we'll be released. And we had sort of had a feeling something was happening. Well, John and I had been in a big argument about nothing was worth arguing about. But anyway, he's very hard-headed, and I'm a really easygoing guy. And but I wasn't going to let him get away with this. So they called my name, and I'm walking out with my little rice mat folded up with my blanket in it. And I'm walking out, and John comes up and grabs hold of my this pajama thing. He said, Orson, I'm sorry we had an argument. You're a great guy. You're my best friend, etc. I said, you little shanty Irish bastard. I said, I don't have anything to say to you. And I turned around and walked away. And I turned around and looked back, and he was like, and I said, I'm just teasing. I'll see you when we get home. We were convinced we were getting ready to go home. And I got to Jacksonville Naval Air Station on the 7th of March, the day before my birthday. Everything I do in Vietnam is all related to some special day. And I'm there, and 2 weeks later, John comes to Jacksonville Naval Air Station to go to the same hospital I was in. And I managed, because I was a very special person, to let me do what I wanted to do. And I walked up to the ramp, and I got down at the bottom of it and just sat there. And I looked up and I said, it's about damn time you got here. And it was McCain walking down to see me. So we were very close, and I miss him a whole lot. He was a good man. And He's cantankerous. I didn't agree with him on everything. We had serious arguments, but I love the guy. Any other questions? Somebody shoot me if this goes too far.
So you mentioned that honor, integrity, and patriotism are really strong core values. Which of the three is the most important to you and why?
Integrity, honesty, honor, integrity, and what?
Patriotism.
They all go together. And I don't mean that facetiously, but they're just things. I mentioned I was raised by my grandmother and great aunt. Those TOLs, as we call them in the family, the two old ladies, imbued in me a love of my country, the belief that we need to work hard, the belief that you're supposed to be nice to people. To this day, if you're a woman around me, I'm opening the door for you. How are you today, ma'am? I've got all those things they taught me. And I think we as a group were taught those things, and honor and integrity, all those things are important. You're not going to survive with just one of them. You can't say, well, I'm the nicest guy in the world. Everybody loves me. That doesn't work that way. You've got to aspire to do more than anybody and do it right and do it the right way. God loves us. He expects us to love each other, and he also expects us to fight to keep the good in this world still good. Don't let it go, because there's a darn good chance we might be letting it go. Any other questions? I could talk to you all night, and I know you're all tired. That was a wonderful dinner. Thank you very much for the hospitality.